What Drives You is brought to you by Ziglar, your premier source for equipping life and leadership coaches. Visit Ziglar.com and let them inspire your true coaching performance.
Yeah.
This is What Drives You. I'm your host, Kevin Miller, and thank you, as always, for joining me as I talk with today's most influential change makers to uncover what truly drives them and extract the big takeaways from their insights so you can integrate that wisdom and leverage the power of your unique inner drive and wake up every day to your authentic, driven, and inspired life. Here in America, we're massively overfed and often undernourished. I think likewise, we're in this age of dramatic overcommunication and underconnection. And here lies the opportunity. This is the superpower to evolve past mere communication and get to connection. And this is where the magic happens. If you can connect, you can influence. And you're about to learn that you, in fact, me too, don't really know how to connect, or at least we can do it better and more consistently and frequently. So my expert for the series is Charles Duhigg. And I got to know Charles intimately on a beach in Florida nearly a decade ago. Now, he wasn't there. I was on a getaway with my wife, and I was devouring, for those of you watching the video, this book, The Power of Habit. This thing is tattered. It probably still has sand in it. I have marked it up. Still my favorite resource, period, on habits. So when I got contacted by an agency about having Charles on the show and that the focus was communication, I said, schedule it, period, immediately. I don't need to see a thing. And of course, Charles delivered, and you're about to hear how to do what few people do well. And you can make the change immediately. And that's how to connect. So if you don't know Charles, you're one of the few who don't. He's a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, the author of Power of Habit, which spent over 3 years on the bestseller list and has been translated into 40 languages. Smarter, Faster, Better, another bestseller. And now again, this new book is Supercommunicators, How to Unlock the Secret Language of Connection. Charles also writes for the New Yorker magazine. He's a graduate of Yale and Harvard Business School. He's been a frequent contributor on CNBC and This American Life and NPR and PBS and so many more. And the bio says, Charles, that you were also, and I pull this out, we just talked about cycling before the show here. You were also, for one terrifying day in 1999, a bike messenger in San Francisco. And coming from,
yes.
I probably normally bypass something like that. But with my cycling background, I got to know about that. Tell me what happened.
I was the worst bike messenger on earth. I was so bad at it. I had my own bike in a messenger bag, and I was like, oh man, I got this covered. And so I was living in Oakland and needed a job. And so I got a job as a bike messenger. And the first day, and I did not know San Francisco at all. And as you know, San Francisco is crazy hilly. And so the first day they give me like a couple of pickups, and one of them is at the top of this huge hill, which of course I could have gotten to without going up the hill, but I didn't know that. And as I'm pedaling up this hill, I'm like, oh man, this must be something they do like with rookies on the first day. They're going to be up there like ready to applaud me and give me a beer. Of course, I got up there, picked up the package, and they called and they were like, what's taking you so long? And I was like, oh, I'm not cut out for this, man.
That is excellent. Well, it's funny. I love the show. Back when I was, cycling full time, and Quicksilver with Kevin Bacon about him being a bike messenger.
Yeah.
Just this freedom. And so I've always thought that sounds cool, but I get that. That could be a little humbling. Man, so honored. I have had this book actually sits above on my book of literally these are teaching books. These are classics.
Thank you.
So really, when this came across, and I can't wait to talk about this. I mean, my book is on drive. What drives? Yeah. And it's really, at the heart of it, I want people to get to and clarify their values. Okay, when I read your book, this new book, Supercommunicators, it looks like, okay, it's Supercommunicators, but the effort is to help people actually, authentically, finally connect. I assume that's your heart at the bottom.
That's exactly right. And thank you for your kind words on Power of Habit. You sit as you sit there for like 3 years writing something, and you're like, I wonder if anyone's actually going to read it. So when you hear from people that like they appreciate it, it's just so meaningful.
Again, here it is. It's marked up. I remember being on the beach. I'm supposed to be having this good time with my wife. I was going to say your wife might not have been too happy that you're ignoring and getting a suntan, and I was over there getting an education. But.
Excellent. Yeah. So the thing that for me really made trying to learn about how conversations work really compelling was a couple of experiences I had, but undergirding them was this, and I can talk about those, but undergirding them was this basic kind of feeling I had, which is we as a nation and as a people have always been really good at conversations, right? America was born out of conversations, hard conversations. That's what the Constitutional Convention was. And when you look at why humans as a species have succeeded so well, it's because of our ability to communicate. That's what distinguishes us from other species. And yet at the same time, and I imagine you've been feeling this too, it feels like over the last decade, we've just forgotten how to do this, right? We've stopped having hard conversations with people who feel differently than we do because it just feels so like high stakes and scary. So we only talk to people who agree with us, and that's not great. And even when we're doing that, we tend not to have those deep conversations, right? The more that we can communicate online, the more that we can access almost anyone, the less it felt to me like we were having these really important conversations. And like those conversations are why I fell in love with my wife, right? I remember in college, like those conversations that last all night where you feel like you've learned something about yourself. Those are really, really meaningful. And so I wanted to understand, like, what do we know about the science of how they work? And most importantly, how can we get better at them? Because there are some people who you can see know how to do this so well.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I think we look at it kind of like again, to use my book as an example, one of the myths I talk about is this idea that some people have drive and some people don't. And I don't find that
Right.
Everybody, has drive. But this aspect of connecting, we think, oh, some people have that ability and some don't. They've got the gift of, actually, your book got me thinking about the gift of gab. And I thought, gift of gab means somebody who just talks a lot. That doesn't mean anything.
Right.
They talk, they listen to themselves talk, even if nobody else is having fun. But is that, connecting seems to be like this myth that some people have that art and some people don't. And that's why I love yours, the researcher, going, well, no, you can. I mean, maybe some people, they were exposed to it. I think I was, Charles. I think that I saw that my parents, my dad was in sales, and gosh, I grew up going to Dale Carnegie classes and, how to win friends and influence people. And it was to pay attention. So I was kind of taught that, but that's super rare. And most of us just communicate. And you've got me thinking about that. We're in this age of communication, but we're just communicating. We're just, a computer can, a robot can communicate, but they can't connect.
And they can't connect, and they can't have conversations the same way humans can. And you're exactly right. What's interesting is that the name of the book is Supercommunicators. And I think when people come to it, sometimes they think, well, there must be this special group that are supercommunicators. But actually what the research tells us is all of us are super communicators. All of us at times have known exactly what to say to a friend to make them feel better, or have known exactly how to go into a meeting and communicate our ideas so everyone agrees with us. We are all at times super communicators. We all know how to connect on an intuitive level, but sometimes we forget. Sometimes we get in our own way. Sometimes we don't understand how the situation has changed a little bit and how we have to adapt to that. And so what the book is about is it's about a set of skills that allow our super communication instincts to come out, that tell us how to recognize what kind of conversation is occurring and to accommodate that, because that's what helps us connect with other people.
And I hear you. And again, I'm studying the book, so I get it. And I'm thinking, man, it's so, you got to be you got to be aware. Obviously, you got to be aware, because we so often go into conversations, and I've done it in the past. I've done it with intent, where I've kind of had some thoughts in mind, and you go in and you're like a deer in the headlights.
Absolutely.
Kind of in the conversation, you forget everything. You walk away and go, oh my gosh, I did not remember anything.
Or you're focused on what you want to say, right?
Totally.
Rather than whether the other person is listening to them. So I think you're right. It can feel kind of overwhelming, but the nice thing is there's actually some very simple ways to do this. The first, and this is an example that kind of like was the genesis of the book, is that this thing would happen to me where I came home, and I'm assuming this probably happens to you and everyone is listening also. I would come home after like a tough day, and I would start complaining to my wife, and I'd tell her like, my boss is a jerk and my colleagues don't appreciate me. And she would give me this very practical advice. She'd say something like, look, why don't you take your boss out to lunch and get to know each other a little bit better? And instead of hearing her good advice, I would just get more upset. I'd be like, why aren't you supporting me? I want you to be outraged on my behalf. Like, you're taking his side. And when I went to researchers and asked them why this was happening, what they said is, look, the first thing you have to realize is we think of a discussion as one thing, but every discussion is filled with multiple conversations.
Yeah.
And most of those conversations fit into one of three buckets. There's usually conversations that are about practical things, right? Like how to make plans, how to make decisions. There's emotional conversations where the goal is not to make a plan, or solve a problem. It's to share how we feel. And then there's social conversations, which are conversations about how we see other people and they see us and how our identities influence our choices. And they said, look, when you went and talked to your wife, you were having an emotional conversation. You were in an emotional mindset. And she responded to you with very good practical advice. She started having a practical conversation. And both of those are fine, but because you were having different kinds of conversations at the same time, neither of you were able to hear each other. Neither of you were able to hear what the other person wanted. And so the first step in just becoming better at communication is just taking a moment to ask yourself, like, what kind of conversation is happening here? Like, does it seem like we're solving a problem together? Does it seem like this person's emotional? Does it seem like we're talking about social issues? And then just meeting the other person where they're at and inviting them to match you. This is actually known as the matching principle within psychology. What it says is that to connect in a conversation, we have to have the same kind of conversation at the same time.
It's interesting. You've got me thinking, I hadn't thought about this before, like a self-driving car, which I've never been in. I can't imagine. But, imagine if I had that and I get in and I just pushed, just drive, just go.
Right.
You're like, oh my God, we would never do that. I get in and you have to put, okay, here's the address, whatever. And that's what you've got me thinking of with this. And you say this in the book that in essence, if I could just stop myself and say, what is the goal of this conversation?
Absolutely.
And if it's simply to say, hey, guys, is the dishwasher, are these clean or dirty? Okay. I don't need to think much about that. What's my goal? It's to know if they're clean or dirty in a story. So that's fine. And that may make up, however much, maybe, whatever percentage of conversation during the day is going to tend to be that. But then the other ones where you're coming to a kid about an issue, or like you said, a wife or a business partner or a customer, whatever, to go, okay, what is my goal? The thing on that one, Charles, we just did recently a series and it's overlapped a lot and some others on emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Because at some point when I'm reading your book, I'm going, man, I'm just getting up to speed on even being able to articulate what is my goal. Well, my goal is to just get something across. And I think if you're my therapist, you go, no, I think you want something more, Kevin. I go, okay, what is it? What is it? I'm wanting to be. And then we're into that aspect. So I think from my own standpoint, which is why we're sitting here talking about it, I'm realizing, gosh, to do this well, I really need to get better understanding of what am I trying to communicate?
What are you trying? Why are you opening your mouth? And there's some really interesting research about that. Like there was a study that was done where some researchers went into an investment bank, and this was like a bank where like people like fought for deals and bonuses. They were at each other's throats all day long, and they told everyone before each meeting, before you come into the meeting, we just want you to write down one sentence just for yourself. Write down what you hope to accomplish in this meeting and what kind of tone you hope to establish, or mood. And so people would write down things like, I want to finalize the budget, but I don't want anyone to feel like left out. Or even with conversations with friends, they'd be like, I want to ask Maria if she wants to come on vacation with me, but I want to make it easier for her to say no. And they found that if people wrote down that sentence, it literally took 10 seconds. If people wrote down that sentence, the incidence of conflict went down 80%. And it's not because people agreed with each other more. It's not because they stopped competing. It's because once you know what you want, it's a lot easier to figure out how to shape a conversation. And if the other people you're talking to know what you want, and if they know what they want, then you guys know why you're there, right? Rather than like all these experiments like, hey, are you interested in this? And what do you think about that? And I'm upset at work and you've got good advice. If we both know why we're there, it's going to make it easier to hear each other.
The intent. Yes. I mean, I love that. What is the intent? Because I think, and again, you gotta, for anybody who's had a serious relationship, especially like a marriage, I mean, this is where it comes up because, how many times does that conversation start and you're like, There's a lot at
Okay.
play here.
There's a lot going on underneath the
I'm
surface.
not sure which place to step. Yeah, totally. And again, in a high stakes, business environment, same thing. Okay, I got 100 questions. One of them is, as you talked about, like coming in with an emotional, aspect after work, and your wife gives a practical. Are we going to, by personality style or however you define it, you tell me, are we going to tend to be someone who's generally going to come out of the same box, the same category? Like Kevin, by far and large, is there to talk about, well, I was going to say practicality, but you put it into the first. All right, what is this really about? Decision-making mindset.
Yeah.
That as I read that, I thought, I think that I pretty much primarily come out of a decision-making mindset, whereas my wife, to be frank, is going to come out of an emotional mindset. It's just kind of who we are. Is that fair?
So I think what's happening here is that very often we see ourselves a specific way and we channel our conversation and communication through that lens. So because you think of yourself as a practical decision-making guy, when you're talking to your wife, even if you're feeling emotional and you're not totally aware that you're feeling emotional, you're going to try and jam those emotions into a decision-making kind of perspective, right? You're going to be like, look, we got to decide like where we're going for like, Thanksgiving. Are we going to my mom's place or your mom's place? We got to decide it right now. Whereas what might actually be driving you is that you don't like to go to her mom's place or you don't like to go to your mom's place. There's a little bit of emotions there, but you're much more comfortable with a decision-making approach. Whereas she actually might be in a place where she just wants to make a decision, but because she's more comfortable posing things in an emotional frame, she comes to you with what sounds like emotions. And so here's a way to kind of sidestep this, right? Sidestep our habits, our communication habits. When you're talking to someone and you're not exactly certain where they're coming from or what's going on underneath, it's really easy to ask them, okay, look, do you want me to help you?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to hear you? Or do you want me to hug you?
Mm-hmm.
And those are the three different kinds of conversations. Because if I say, do you want me to help you? Then what I'm asking is this a problem that we can solve, right? Do you want me to hear you? Means you're feeling emotional and you just want me to hear what's going on with you. I want to hear your frustrations. And do you want me to hug you? Is like a social conversation. Like we're all coming together to figure out how we solve this as a group. And simply by asking that, oftentimes what happens is that people say it's a way of getting people to figure out their own motivations, their own drive. Because oftentimes they'll say something like, look, I don't need you to solve this problem. I don't need you to help me. Like, I just need you to listen to the fact that like, I feel like we need to make a decision. And then they know like, okay, I don't have to solve the problem. I don't have to get practical. He might be talking practical, but what's actually going on is that he just wants me to hear how he feels.
So if I am looking at I'll call it a healthy, efficient conversation, if I come into it with my decision-making structure, but in truth, I'm trying to relay some emotions in there. First off, I'm probably making it more complicated. So I'm muddying the waters right to begin with, which if I would go if I would stop again, back to the awareness and go, okay, Kevin, what are you trying to do? And I'm frustrated. I really don't want, I don't really want to go do that thing. And you would say, just communicate that.
Yes, communicate that. Recognize that like you actually want to have an emotional conversation. And by the way, you're exactly right. Men tend to like very easily habitually fall into that practical decision-making mindset, and women with more frequency fall into the emotional approach. But that doesn't mean that we have different levels of emotions or practical decision-making needs. It just means what we're comfortable with. And honestly, if you can take the second to ask yourself a question and say like, actually, what do I want out of this? Why am I having this conversation? You're going to know that like, I don't want my wife to we don't need to make a decision right now. I just want to tell her like, I'm frustrated. Yeah. I'm frustrated that we might go to your mom's. And I've told you before, I don't like going to your mom's, or like, if we go to your mom's, it's going to be like a nightmare because we got to get a hotel and it's going to be expensive. Once you know yourself a little bit better, you know how to communicate better. And oftentimes it's the other person asking us a question or us asking them a question that lets us figure out what's really going on underneath.
Okay, I want to come to that, though. I do want to point out that you just unearthed me right there, Charles. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sitting here thinking, I think that's what I do. I think that's what I do is I take a decision aspect and I'll shove my emotions in and around it and probably try to force. For some reason, I'm probably trying to force things, and I'm not being honest with myself. Again, I'm not, so in all grace, but not being honest with myself to begin with. And no wonder it gets confused out here, because it leaves somebody
Absolutely.
going, what the heck is he trying to do?
And by the way, that's totally natural. Like, you shouldn't beat up on yourself for
Right.
doing that. And my guess is that your wife is very, very talented. Okay, I say this because mine is, at asking you the question that helps you realize what's really going on, right? Like saying something like, honey, we can go wherever you want, but can you tell me why going to my mom seems to bug you so much? And then they've invited, like she recognizes that this is actually an emotional conversation. She invites you to be emotional with her without saying, like, why are you a blubbering ball of emotions? And by inviting you to match her, to be emotional with her, suddenly it becomes safe and easy to do so. And
Yeah.
and you know how to communicate with her. And you probably do the same thing for her all the time, right? She comes to you with something, you don't understand what the hell's going on, and then you ask her a question and it's clear what's actually being talked about.
I think so, but I mean, your book is kind of opening the kimono here. Because I usually know. I mean, we know that as guys. Okay, so your wife comes along, and this is being so stereotyping, but for the sake of the point, and shares something, whatever. And I know, okay, don't just jump to fix, whatever. But I'm still concerned about how intelligent I'm being with this. Okay. I want to come in because you mentioned questions, and that's such a big part of it. I'm going to back into it by citing that I think in your book you said generally, and this is probably a big cross section, but generally, as we all go throughout the day, assuming that we are, leaving the house and going to a place of work or school or whatever, that 70% of our conversations are kind of a social group, or like you said, the social mindset.
Yeah,
Is that
that's
right?
exactly right. That's exactly right. And most
Okay.
of the conversations that we have are actually about either other people or how we relate to other people, right? So if you think about it, like, a lot of the conversations you have with your wife are probably about how you feel or how she feels, or things you guys got to figure out. But then there's lots of conversations, I'm sure, about your kids.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a social conversation, because one of the things you're talking about in that conversation is, how does my kid see themselves? How do
Mm-hmm.
I see my kid? How does my kid see me? And how does that shape how I should interact with them? Those are can be complicated conversations and subtle conversations, but they're obviously really important.
So those are huge. I mean, I've got a good friend. He's really good about, because he is often seeing a therapist, talking about some issues with kids. He's got some hard things going on, and how often the therapist will come back and go, "Okay, this is what you dealt with the kid. That wasn't about them.
Right.
That was about you, wasn't it?"
Yeah.
And how, even our own association with ourselves in regards. Okay, we're getting really acute there. I want to come back to the aspect of questions, though, and I want to put it in a group setting. So like this morning, I walked in here to my office, it was a birthday. And so we were in the little, kitchen area, and there's, I don't know, 6, 7 of us, and sing happy birthday and whatnot. Now in there, you're talking about, there's often different conversation styles, and we got the one person who talks nonstop, the other person who doesn't, whatever. And you talk about the effect. I'll have you describe this, the effectiveness of that. You call it a high centrality participant. And I love this quote, or this research that you put in there, that person, I want you to tell us, describe who that is or how they are. But you said they are 10 to 20 times more likely, or to ask 10 to 20 times more questions.
Yeah.
And that one, again, thank goodness for the exposure I got from my parents and whatnot. And I was taught to look at that and to stand back and to realize how often these conversations are going on, and nobody ever asks a question.
It's crazy, isn't it? And
It is.
so these high centrality participants, that's what scientists call them. But these are super communicators, right? These are people who are really good at being super communicators. They do it consistently. And you're exactly right. They tend to ask 10 to 20 times more questions than other people. But what's interesting is you don't notice half the time when they're asking a question, because the questions are things like, "Oh man, what do you think about that?" Or like, what'd you do last night? Or, "Hey, did you have any thoughts on that?" Or, "What do you think is going to happen next?" There are these little questions that just pop up and kind of infiltrate the conversation, but invite other people in. And there's actually a good way to identify the super communicators that you know, which is just, and everyone in the audience can do this. Think for a second, if you've had a really, really bad day, who you would call that you know would make you feel better, right? Mm-hmm. There's like probably one person that like, you know, that like they just make you feel better afterwards. And now I'm going to take you. Do you have that person in your mind?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So let me ask you, who is it?
Randy. Yeah.
Okay.
My good friend. I want to insert though. I don't know that he is that person to many people. He just happens to be to me.
Fine. That's okay. That's okay. Cause he's a super communicator with you, mm-hmm. and he could probably be a super communicator with everyone if he totally understood what's going on, but let's just talk about you. Mm-hmm. Okay. So let me ask you, I'm going to ask you some questions. Is Randy the funniest guy you know? Like, does he tell way more jokes? No. Is he like the smartest guy you know? Like if you had like a math problem to solve, would you definitely go to Randy and ask him to solve it for you?
Maybe, but that's not why he's who he is.
Right. So what does Randy do that makes you feel better? Why would you call Randy?
He listens with honest interest. He really, I mean, that's why I know, I'm going to say I know, but he does a good job making me feel like he cares. And to what you talk about, he relates, and is equally vulnerable. And again, I don't think this is an interesting thing you've got me thinking of, that, you know, we're trying to be that, but we may be it for some people and not others based on the level of investment. Is that fair even?
Yeah. Or just level of comfort, or like the habits that we
maybe
with some friends and not with others.
Yeah.
If I was to watch you and Randy talking, my guess is what I would see. And you're probably a super communicator for Randy too. He'd probably call you when he's having. My guess is that what I would see is a couple things. First of all, you guys are asking each other tons of questions, sometimes without even realizing it. Maybe you're just making a statement and kind of like lilting your voice up at the end to show the other person you're asking them this thing rather than telling them.
Sure.
My guess is that when one of you says something kind of vulnerable, the other person responds with vulnerability. So you're engaged in emotional reciprocity, which is one of the key components of emotional intelligence.
I can watch him. It's interesting, Charles, because we've been friends. We office together. We do life together. We're doing it for so long that sometimes I'll find myself, it sounds weird. You'll get it though. I find myself appreciating and watching us talk and to realize I'm saying this, and I can see him. I can see that what I said doesn't set well with him, but he's not just going to come out with it. He's going to think, be respectful, and care.
And he's going to find the way to tell you what he's thinking rather than just reacting, right? And so what's interesting is the thing that you're doing with Randy and that Randy is doing with you guys could do that with anyone. Mm-hmm. It's actually just basically kind of a mindset, is that you have that capacity, and there's nothing magical about Randy and your conversations with him. What's magical is the attitude that you bring into it and the level of attention that you bring into it. And you could have, and I'm sure that you have those same kinds of conversations with your wife, with your kids. My guess is you sometimes have it with podcast guests that you've just met, or strangers that you meet on the bus. Sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't. And it can feel like this like total mystery about why. But the answer is, it's just a set of skills. Like, it's literally a set of skills that you learned growing up and that Randy learned, and that you guys choose to use those skills with each other, but you can use those skills with anyone. And in fact, what studies show is it's way easier to do it than we think it is.
Okay. I hear you. I haven't though. I mean, I have to a degree, you know, again, how to win friends and influence people. And I've learned how to do that. But as far as me really connecting, I can do that, Charles, but not feel connected, even if other people do. And I'm not, but I know I'm kind of just being nice and whatnot, or, you know, trying to relate. But I haven't, I think in my what I'm feeling from you, I'm thinking if I become aware of this, I can better tune in to how somebody else is being.
Absolutely.
And connect in a meaningful way instead of, I think I'm quick to go and go, this isn't my kind of person. We're not going to connect and I'm just not going to make the effort.
And my guess is that there are like when we connect with someone, it doesn't necessarily mean we will like want to marry them, right? Like sometimes a connection is literally just having a good conversation on a bus. But my guess is that there are times that you bump into someone and you're at this place where you could connect. And by the way, you don't have to. No one is obligated to have a conversation they don't want to have. Sometimes we're on the bus and we just want to read our book or we just want to zone out. But when we are in a situation where we're having a conversation or we want to connect, if we just understand what's going on a little bit more, then that connection not only becomes possible, it actually becomes easier than not connecting. Like think about when you're on that bus and you're having a conversation with someone and you're not connecting with them. That's work, man. Like you're trying to think like, what, I can't let the conversation just peter out. Like I got to come up with something else to ask, or if you're doing a podcast and like the other person isn't playing along, you're working hard. You're coming away from the podcast sweaty. You've like put in the hours. Whereas when you connect, it feels easy. Actually, our brains are hardwired to make it feel easy.
Well, okay, that gets into, neurological synchronization is what you said, the alignment of our brains and bodies. And when I love this from a research aspect, as opposed to, it's kind of how I did the intro, that, even if we feel like we can connect with people, this can enable us to do it more consistently, more frequently. I was going to say methodically. That doesn't sound like a good word, but I want to do that. I want to be able to understand and be able to do it, as opposed to, I think I've done it and it's been kind of just happenstance. If it's the right person that I synchronize with, which but how can I help that happen?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can make that happen. So let's talk about this neural entrainment, this neurological synchronization. So if right now we're having a conversation, if I could measure all these things, what I would see is that you and me, even though we're doing this over the internet, we're separated by a huge distance. You and me, our pupils have started dilating at the same rate. The electrical impulses along our skin have begun to match each other. Our heart rates have begun matching each other, even though we're separated by distance. And most importantly, and the reason this is happening is because in our brains, our brain waves are starting to synchronize. That's what communication is. Communication is me describing an idea or an emotion and you experiencing that idea or emotion because you're having a similar neurological experience to the one I'm describing. That's how we connect.
Okay. The epiphany, I've been doing this a long time, Charles. It hasn't always been as enjoyable as it is today. And I've told people that, so we talked about cycling. So when I got on a mountain bike and I hit the trail, pretty quick, man, I am in flow, the definition of flow, man. I'm just in it. In all truth. And I've been aware of this for a year, maybe consciously aware that generally sitting down and doing this right here, man, it's a flow state for me. It really is. I hadn't conceptualized it around the structure that you're given right now. Because back to the thing of being aware and being intentional, we both came here knowing what we're about. We have a topic, we have an interest. It's a shared interest right off the bat. We know there's like some automatic, I don't know if it's fair to say that we're already synchronized, but there's a great propensity for it too. We're both here. This is beneficial for us. It's beneficial for our audiences, for our business. Everything right here, there's every reason to be. And real quick, I feel like I love this, that we're not sitting together, but we're across the, few states away and I can see you and I feel synchronized to your emotions. I can see it. I can see when you get excited. I can see when I say something and you tune in. I could also see if you're like looking out of the window because you're bored to death. and we're in tune with this. And I just had not thought about how because this is an intentional conversation. Why don't I, at least with a thought for a moment of what's my goal for the conversation as I walk in with my kid, my wife, my friend, my whatever, and give it the opportunity to some degree that we do here.
Yeah. And I'm going to point out some other stuff that you've done that's helped with this. So I mentioned that I would have these conversations with my wife that didn't go so well. Yeah. Right. And you started sharing stuff about yourself. You started sharing that, like, sometimes you come home and you try and like solve the problem. I exposed a vulnerability and you were vulnerable in return. And it's almost impossible not to feel closer to someone who recognizes your vulnerability and matches it. And that doesn't mean you have to like start weeping. That just means you have to be like, bro, I know what you're talking about. I've been there before. I know that like marriage can be hard.
I have, okay. So in reading that about that's a key point is you talked about that with the high centrality participant, that they're usually going to ask a question and then they will also relate like that. They'll share a story of themselves. I'm afraid I fall away from that sometimes, even in the effort to keep the conversation on the other person. And I think I'm doing a good thing. Okay, I'll just keep asking questions. And I don't take the effort to relate those. So when you wrote about that being a key attribute, I thought, maybe I do it here on the shows, but I think out in life, a lot of times I don't do that. I don't take the time to relate with something like that, and I'm missing out.
And that's known as conversational receptiveness. One of the stories in the book is about how NASA looks for astronauts. And so one of the things that happened is that as space missions became longer, 6 months, a year up in the space station, the psychologists at NASA recognized that what they needed to do is they needed to started identifying people who were really good at emotional intelligence, really good at connecting with other people. Now, the problem is if you make it to the final round of interviews for NASA, you are like great at interviewing. You know all the right answers, right? If they ask you like, what's your greatest weakness? You're going to have 5 fantastic answers. If they ask you like, how are you vulnerable? You're going to have practiced this thing. And so NASA was having real trouble telling the difference between people who are genuinely emotionally intelligent from those who could fake it really, really well. Because the problem is the people who could fake it really well, they could fake it on the ground, but then 4 months into a space mission, they would stop faking it and everything would fall apart. And so here's what this one guy who was the head psychologist for NASA did. He started conducting these tests during interviews. He would ask an applicant a question about like, what's your greatest weakness or what's the most painful memory you can think of? In fact, there's this one situation described to me. So he asked this guy who looked like a perfect candidate, what's your most painful memory? And the guy said, well, my father passed away recently. And he had this great answer. He was like, I've talked to my pastor about it. And we've like talked about all the things that I should have said. And I'm working through the grief. It was the perfect answer. And previously that would have gotten him admitted right away. But this time, this guy, he does something different. He says, it's really hard. I hear that my sister passed away from cancer, and I think about her all the time. And he kind of talks a little bit about his sister, and then he just stops and watches to see what the applicant does. And the applicant doesn't ask any questions. And it's at this point that the psychologist realized this guy has practiced showing vulnerability, but he's not actually interested in my vulnerability. Like he doesn't want to participate in this conversation. Compare that to another candidate a couple of weeks later who, as soon as this guy mentioned his sister, he was like, oh man, like, how did your mom react to that? Like, do you still think about your sister? Like, what was that like for you? Right? Those seem like really personal, intimate questions. But of course, if you've ever lost someone in your life, you know that like, you love it when people ask you about that person. Right? My dad passed away 5 years ago. And like the best thing that ever happened afterwards is that some people would say, tell me about your dad, or what was the funeral like? And you're just so grateful to be able to share something about yourself. So the answer to your question is, I think that all of us can do this really easily simply by recognizing that if we give back what someone's sending to us, we're actually making that conversation better for both of us.
Yeah. It's okay. First off, it's really interesting that NASA, I love the example because that's not what you would think of. The NASA, okay, they're just looking for the Mensa Society, MIT grad,
right stuff,
whatever. And you're saying, no, they want somebody who's not even aware of emotional intelligence, but it literally is if they are going to have long-term success in space. That's huge. And I want people to hear that. I don't know when this is going to publish, but we've got an astronaut coming on the show.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I'll have to hit on this. But the other thing too, and you said it in essence before, that there is, this is not something we may want to do with everyone. This is an opportunity for the times and the people and the groups where we really want to connect, where we really do want to integrate. Because I'm thinking, to be honest, I mean, it's kind of like having boundaries. I mean, I'm not going to have this conversation with everybody. If you're on the bus, chances are I'm going to just want to read my book or listen.
Totally. And that's totally fine. And there's sometimes that you're going to pretend to have a conversation with your kids and you don't actually want to have a conversation. You just want to tell them what to do, right? It's like,
that is true.
Hey, Jim, do you have any homework? Yes, let's go do the homework. You're not looking for a conversation there, but you can't be a jerk. You can't just like barrel in. So you kind of have a faux conversation. It's important. It's important to recognize when we want to have conversations and when we don't, and to acknowledge that's okay. You can be on the bus. And even if someone tries to strike up a conversation with you, if you're not in the mood, that is okay. You can just read your book.
No, it makes me okay. So your 3 categories. I'm feeling like we need to put the poster up at my house and here at work. Okay, what is this really about? Decision-making mindset. How do we feel? Emotional mindset. Who are we? Social mindset. So I can point and say, hey guys, what is this really about? This is a decision-making mindset. This is what I want done.
Right.
It's funny, but in essence, that's what you're talking about. If I could get that self-aware first.
Yeah.
And then be aware of others, because this other thing, this is an overlapping thing that you're putting the research to, that when we talk about relationships, the point ultimately is to relate. It is to relate. Exactly right. And that's what you're bringing to. This is how you can relate, as opposed to what I often do too. I'm in the conversation. I'm not aware at all. I'm just thinking about myself, and I am at best just communicating. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Might as well be Charlie Brown's mom.
I'm waiting for my turn to talk. Now it's your turn. Then it's going to be my turn.
Okay. Hit on that though, Charles, because we just talked about I got to keep going back up to the high centrality participant, which,
you can call them supercommunicators. That's what we call them. It's only the scientists who call them that.
Okay. So everybody, so super communicators in your group that you may be, or somebody else may be, or whatever, that they are going to come in and hear you. So you come in and blah, 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 whatever they talk about. But like you come in and talk about, this is what happened at work or whatnot, that there is value. We just talked about that, the value of relating with an empathetic story, a way that you connect. But I also hear you saying it's not going to be boom right away. The minute that they get the last syllable out, where you go, oh, that's happened to me.
Right. Wait, your mom died? Wait, 3 years ago, my mom, right? Like that's not,
my mom died way worse than yours.
Yeah. Exactly. That's not relating. That's like stealing the spotlight onto yourself. Yeah. So the question is, how do we do this in a way? What really matters? And there's a couple of things. The first answer is, oftentimes relating doesn't mean telling our own story. It means acknowledging the story that the other person told. So if you tell a really funny story and I laugh, I'm acknowledging that your story is funny, and you and I will feel closer. I don't have to tell a funny story myself, right? It's about me acknowledging what you have said. But the second thing, and this is the most important part, this is what those super communicators do in those groups. This is probably what Randy does for you and you do for him, is proving to the person that you're listening to them. Yeah. And oftentimes we don't understand how to prove we're listening. We think that if someone's talking and we're like nodding our head and like being, that they'll pay attention. But the truth is, when you're talking, it's actually so hard to pay attention to other people that oftentimes the speaker misses what the audience is doing.
Totally.
So the way that we prove we're listening is based on what we do after they stop speaking. And there's another story in the book about this experiment that was done where they brought all these people together. Half of them were gun rights advocates and half of them were gun control advocates. And they wanted to see if they could have these people have a civil conversation with each other. They did not convince each other, just have a civil conversation. And they taught them this one skill, and it's called looping for understanding. What they would say is, okay, when someone says something, when they answer some question, you have to do 3 things. Number 1, ask them any follow-up questions you have to make sure you understand. Number 2, repeat back what they just told you in your own words. And number 3, and this is the most important one and the thing that people always forget, ask them if you got it right. And the reason why this is so powerful is because, and Randy probably does this for you and you do it for him, is that when we repeat back what someone told us in our own words, they know that we've heard them. And if we got it, and if they say, did I get that right? We can say like, you're close, but you're not exactly right. We feel really listened to. That act of listening and proving we are listening, that is how we have the most serious, most important, meaningful conversations. And my guess is when you're talking to Randy, you say something like, this really bummed me out. And he's like, yeah, that would be a real bummer. Like my guess is that like it was probably a tough day, wasn't it afterwards? Like he's just proved to you that he heard you and he's asking if what he heard is right. He's making it pretty subtle and he's making it pretty casual, but as a result, you feel listened to.
And there's what would you say, mutual respect enough too, where I've also had, shared something and he responds, I go, that was not at all what I was talking about.
Right.
Where you just went at. I mean, I've had it happen, to be candid, even in couples counseling, where you say, okay, blah, blah, blah. And the counselor says, so, to my wife, what did you hear Kevin say? And she says, well, yeah, he said this. I go, no, I didn't. That's right. It's not remotely, but it is. It almost makes me think of, the training would be to watch somebody. I mean, I could see it happening on a screen and they give this, monologue of coming in like you did, coming in after they work, blah, blah, blah. And to sit back and it's not to say, what did they say? Like from a memorization, but like, what did you hear?
That's exactly right. Yeah. That's why putting it in your own words is so powerful, is because not only are you showing them that you're trying to understand, but you're actually seeing if you understood.
Right.
Because half the time, and we know this from study after study, half the time we say things and we think that we've communicated really well and the other person genuinely doesn't understand, and it's not their fault. It's because we do a bad job of explaining what's inside our own head.
And then I'm thinking sometimes you realize somebody just doesn't care. They're just not there. And that's valid too. It's interesting that right at the beginning of your book, you give the premise of, and I didn't write down the whole, paragraph, but you talked about work and marriage relationships. That those I have found because, okay, so I've got a wife and I've got Randy. He's my other wife. We are business partners, and those discussions are so different because of the investment. Mm-hmm. Because when something is said, it can be threatening. It weighs on. It's not just a benign conversation with a coworker who may say something. You go, that's kind of off the wall, but whatever. You don't have to go home and sleep with them or share finances or parent with them. That this is where it gets really acute. This is the training ground, I guess, the acute training ground, but it's relevant everywhere. Because what I hear you saying overall with this is, again, aside from just, I would keep using that word benign. There are benign communications. Hey, are the dishes dirty or not?
Totally.
Is anybody going to eat this apple? Whatever. That's just blatant communication that robot could be programmed to do with each other. Everything else, though, I hear you saying, for the most part, it's just not benign. Fair?
It's often, I would say, the way I think about it is meaningful conversations. You're right. Okay. There's lots of conversations we have where like me and my wife like see each other and we're like, hey, who's picking up the kids? And she says, I am. And I'm like, cool, go for it. Right. But then like, once you get beyond that, it's a meaningful conversation. And we actually have lots of meaningful conversations every day in all of our lives. Yeah. Right. And there's many conversations that we choose not to make them meaningful, and that's totally fine. But there's other conversations where if I ask my wife who's picking up the kids and she says, I am, then I like, if I'm listening for it, I know that like, oh, actually this should be a meaningful conversation because she's kind of pissed off that she's picking up the kids and I'm not.
I was just going to ask about that.
Yeah.
Inferences that we don't ask and get
exactly. And at that point, there's something inside my head. And if we know to listen to it, all of us can recognize it to say like, okay, just take a step back and ask a question, right? Asking a question is usually always the right thing to do next, and say, is it okay for you to pick up the kids? Like, do you mind doing that? Or do you have something going on and you feel like I should? And like at that point, we've shifted gears, but we've shifted gears together. And that's why we can connect with each other.
Okay. I'm going to back into a practical question.
Okay.
Because you've got, these are the three categories in your book. I said a minute ago, but I want everybody to hear them. Number one, what is this really about? How do we, is number one, which is decision making. Number two, how do we feel? Mm-hmm. Emotional. And number three, who are we? Social mindset.
Yeah.
Okay. Reconcile those with the help, hug, and hear.
Sure. Okay. So what's this really about? Yeah. It's is a practical conversation, a decision-making conversation. That's help. Do you want me to help you?
Okay,
Right? Should I help you solve the problem? The emotional conversation, and actually I said it a little bit wrong before. How do we feel is the emotional conversation.
Yeah.
And that's the hug. Like, do you want me to give you a hug? Like, do you want me to show you that I hear, like, I'm here for you, I support you? And then the third one is, who are we? Is a social conversation. And that's the here. That oftentimes when I'm in a place where I need to talk about how I'm relating to someone else, I just need you to hear what I'm saying. Because sometimes I'm talking about how I relate to you, right? Like if I come to you, I'm not emotional about it, but I'm saying, Kevin, you're not listening to what I'm saying. And I need you to hear what I'm saying. Or Kevin, I have this problem like with the kids. I keep on telling Jim to clean his room and he won't do it. And I think it's because he doesn't see me as like an authority figure. In those conversations, I don't need you to solve my problem.
Yeah.
I need you to hear what I'm saying and acknowledge that like, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but I'm just looking for you to validate that how this relationship is working and help me think it through.
Okay. So that helps. So, because here's what I'm backing into with the question. If I am going to, because we could say, okay, this is starter. This is 101, beginner 101. Just ask questions, which to some degree you could say is safe. Man, if you're in a social situation and you want to connect with people, whatever, just ask questions. Now, step 2, or I'm asking, help me out here, is if I can be aware though of what somebody's saying, like when you come in the door and you're going to share about work and I can kind of I can sense your mood and I can go, oh, I don't think he's looking for help. I don't know if he's asking for a hug. It's, I've known Charles for a while. He probably just wants to be heard. That's going to help me know which type of question to ask best.
Yeah. And oftentimes, sometimes that you can just ask the question to figure it out, right? Like this, my wife does this all the time with me. She's like, do you want me to solve this problem or do you just want to vent? And like, then she knows what kind of conversation I'm looking for. Now the next step after asking a conversation like that to figure out what kind of conversation we're having is to ask another kind of question, which is known as a deep question. And a deep question, and this gets to this meaningful conversation issue. Yeah. A deep question is a question that asks me to talk about my values, my beliefs, or my experiences. And a deep question doesn't have to appear so deep, right? Like if I asked you, like, I'll ask you one right now. Like, what did you love most about mountain biking?
Definitely somewhat of the adrenaline, but it was mixed with my ability to be able to have my mastery of it.
Yeah. So that question, what did you love most about mountain biking? That didn't seem like super intimate or personal, right? Mm-mm. But that was a deep question because what you responded with is you told me about what you care about. That A, you're like someone who's into adrenaline, but B, mastery is not only important to you, it's really meaningful. Like you get a lot of pleasure from mastery.
Yeah, you could go therapy on me right there.
Totally.
Why is that important?
Yeah. And like I asked you a pretty simple question. Now, what I could have asked you is like, where do you mountain bike? How often do you mountain bike? Those are fact-based questions. Those aren't deep questions.
No feeling.
But by asking you, what do you love about mountain biking, which is a totally normal question to ask, now you're started talking about something that's sort of deep and meaningful.
I'm not forced. I don't want to say. I'm trying to think. What's a positive?
Invited. I invited.
Thank you. I was going to say forced, coerced. Okay, invited. Much better. You invited me to. I mean, it would have been great to folks. You should watch the video. Go to YouTube, watch the video because when you said that, I'm sure I'm trying to. I bet I looked off to the left, which I tend to do. And I had to think about it because you got into a feeling, which is not my most, relevant language. And I gave that to you. But what it did is connect me with you. You just got that out of me. I just shared that with you. And of course you respond with, oh, wow, tell me more. Or
even better, I could respond with, oh man, I totally understand. Like the way that I show mastery is through writing. I get into the flow state through writing. Doesn't it feel amazing? And now I feel
understood and connect. Yeah.
And now we've shared something with each other, right? You know that like writing is really important to me. I know that biking is really important to you. And the reason it's important is because we're good at it and we like to be good at it. And that's important to us. That's like a real conversation.
I hadn't planned this question, but does this have a relation to, we know that certain people have a tendency to talk about that age old thing, talk about ideas or, thoughts or whatnot. Some people like to talk about other people. Some people talk about events. We kind of have categorized that through time. Does that fall into place here?
A little bit. I mean, I think the truth is that everyone talks about these three kinds of things, like the practical conversation, the emotional, and the social conversations. We tend to remember the ones that we are most comfortable in. And so like, if I'm an idea guy and I love talking about ideas, I probably do talk about ideas more than other people. But just because I'm talking about an idea doesn't mean I'm in a decision-making mindset. I could be talking about an idea and it's important to me because it's emotional, right? Like take justice, right? When people talk about justice, that's usually a pretty emotional conversation because what they're really talking about is they're talking about what they think fairness is and whether they've ever been wronged themselves and what that felt like. And so, yes, to answer your question, there are people who definitely they fall back on certain topics. Like I don't follow sports, so I don't talk about sports, right? And lots of other people do talk about sports. But if you were to look at those sports conversations, what we would see is some of those sports conversations are practical. Like, should he make this trade? Should he have done that play? Who's the best coach? Some of the sports conversations are emotional. Like I can't believe that they screwed up that conversion. Like it pains me to watch these guys play. And sometimes it's social. Like I love going to the game because it's a chance for me to like talk to my kids and like we have different kinds of conversations at a game than we do when we're not at the game.
Yeah.
The topics are what we're interested in. The kind of conversation is what's going on inside our head.
It just occurred to me, Charles, this is your research here, your message here is a far more highly applicable message, but has some overlapping with Marshall Rosenberg's nonviolent communication.
Yeah.
I had not thought about it. I came upon that book about a year ago. It was really significant. Now it's, more in an acute therapeutic aspect and looking at, but ultimately you're hearing, and you reminded me a minute ago with something you said that you're getting to the root of what somebody's saying. I think I'm enamored a little bit with the decision-making type propensity or structure that I come through, but I'm still stuffing emotional issues through it.
And that's totally normal. That's totally normal.
I know, but I want to be better. It's not efficient is what it feels like to me.
It's true. It's true. And my guess is that when you and your wife are talking about something and she says to you, look, you seem upset. Like, is this really about where we should spend Thanksgiving? Or is this about your frustrations?
Yeah.
You probably immediately hit the reset button and you're like, actually, it's about frustrations. Right. Yeah. Like you might come into particularly when we're hot, like when we come into a conversation, we're all worked up, we fall back on what feels most comfortable. And for me and you, that's usually like decision-making mindset. I'm going to stuff everything into that. But we are self-aware enough that all it takes is someone to ask us a question to be like, actually, you're right. This is about something more than where we should spend Thanksgiving.
Can you talk? Yes. And you talked about these aspects again. I'm going to keep repeating these, decision, mindset, emotional, and social. And you're talking about the value here to be a super communicator of matching and alignment, being aware of what's going on, the flow of the conversation, the tone of the conversation, and that you are, again, I appreciate in the book, it's not that you're absolutely not dictating. You are orchestrating it somewhat and helping pull, everybody out. I'm going to use the word reconcile a little bit because I have had some discussions around this, Charles, where it's been debated. People struggle with the authenticity of it.
Yeah.
Tell me. Yeah.
Yeah. You have to be authentic. Right. So the way I think about it, you're exactly right that there is like, One way of describing this is this very Machiavellian manipulative thing, right?
That's where
I'm gonna pay attention how you're talking, and then I'm gonna talk back the same way, and I'm gonna like trick you into saying stuff you don't want to say.
Or I'm just doing it so everybody will love me, man.
Or
so
everyone will love me.
Yeah.
And the thing is, that can sometimes work for 20 minutes for one conversation, but we all know people who have tried that, and we learn to recognize pretty quickly that it's not authentic, right? That they're
can I butt in real quick? I've done it. I'm saying I've done it, but what I realized too is I didn't connect.
Yeah.
I didn't connect. And what it has done over time, and now that I'm 52, is I can find myself avoiding social situations because I almost can't not do that. And you're helping me. I want to go back into some now and go, okay, Kevin, you connect, you share a little bit too. Don't just orchestrate and make everybody feel good.
And exactly what you just said is key. You share.
Yeah.
So very often when we're in that mindset where we're just like kind of pantomiming it, we're trying to like play along.
Yeah.
The thing that can cause us to break through, to like stop that inside ourselves, is to say something real. Like the way that you create an authentic connection is you be authentic. And sometimes being authentic is just a matter of like saying something about yourself that's true, right? I mentioned that my dad passed away, right? So like I mentioned that my dad passed away a lot. And the reason why is because it's a real thing. Like I can't talk about my dad passing away without feeling somewhat present in a conversation. It doesn't make me sad. It doesn't make me like depressed. It doesn't bring other people down. It's something that we've either all gone through or we're going to go through. But if I ever feel myself getting kind of phony or getting removed, if I bring up something real like that, all of a sudden I can't help but be back in that conversation. Mm-hmm. And the other person knows if you're faking it, right? There's actually this really interesting study where they would, like, again, back to this laughter thing that the NASA scientists would use. There was a study where they recorded friends laughing together and strangers trying to laugh alike. And they cut the recordings down so you only heard 1 second of laughter. And then they would ask other people to tell which ones were friends and which ones were strangers. And they got it right 90% of the time. Wow. Our brains are actually programmed to notice inauthenticity. When you're not really in a conversation, that other person, if they're trying to be in that conversation, they're probably not rude enough to be like, okay, you're kind of faking it, but they can feel that you're kind of faking it. You can do the same thing, right? You know, when someone's not really like jiving with you, if they're not really on the same wavelength. Our brains literally are hardwired to notice that. And the way that we make it real is we share something about ourselves.
Okay, I'm thinking about that, saying something real. And I'm putting because this happens a lot. So I've got this, and everybody, they hear me talk about this. I've got a couple different guys groups. I call them my adventure groups, and guys who have similar values and interests. But this group is they all share adventures. So we can all go, ski or surf or mountain bike or whatever. We have that in common. A lot of them are business owners and whatnot, and we'll get together. And sometimes it'll turn that way, and they'll get talking about real estate. There's a couple of real estate funds or whatever, and they'll start talking. So for me to be authentic and say something real, I can't in that topic. Other than this is true story. This is what if it comes around, I go, guys, I literally got nothing to offer. Right. You want to talk about personal development? I'm your guy. You're real estate. I'm gonna go get a drink. Anybody want something? And that's real. That's my
totally real.
Being real. Where in the past I probably would have tried to play along and feel pressured to.
Total. And the truth of the matter is, like, you don't have to be in that conversation, right? Yeah. You can just be someone who like hangs out and listens. Yeah. Like that's totally fine. I mean, and the truth is, when you have a group together, there's always going to be one or two people who are at the periphery and are like, I have no idea what you guys are talking about. It's not that interesting to me. I'm just going to kind of listen and like think my own thoughts. And then when you guys start talking about something that's more interesting to me, I'm going to get in the conversation. Yeah. And that's fine. We don't have to have conversations with everyone. We don't have to have conversations that we don't want to have. I think part of it is giving ourselves permission to not have the conversation. Because you're right. You probably were faking it because you felt bad. You felt like if you were being left out, you weren't part of the group, or you weren't living up to their expectations as a member of the group or the host. You felt this pressure to participate in a conversation you didn't actually want to be in. But the truth of the matter is, the most honest thing you can do is have the conversations you want to have. And when you don't want to have it, say like, that's okay. And it is okay, right? They're talking about real estate. You don't care about real estate. They don't want you like butting your way.
Like, it reminds me, Charles. So we just had Thomas Hubel on the show.
Oh yeah.
And a big part of his new book, doggone, what is it called? I forgot. I don't think it's come out yet, but attunement. But he talks about being, becoming, and belonging, down here. And I'm thinking, with what you're talking about, we so want to belong. We so want to belong, but to even be authentic in there, because it's interesting, true story. When I was with these guys, at whatever point, I'm sure it's been long ago now, but they were talking about this real estate thing, and I'm sitting there going, gosh, I probably should do real estate. I probably invest. I'm not doing it. They're all talking about it. And I started to feel bad about myself a little bit, or at least a little bit of pressure. And then I finally came up and go, okay, dude, back to authenticity. It's just not my gig. And literally, this is what came. You'll appreciate this, Charles. I thought, now I invest in real estate of the mind. That's what I know. That's what I understand. And that's authentic. That came out of that, but it took the awareness of back to emotional intelligence of what am I feeling here in this time? Because I want to belong, but I don't I do belong with these guys, but I don't resonate with that thing. So what's real and authentic to me? Say something real. I don't know what you guys are talking about. You want to talk about real estate of the mind? I'm your guy.
And my guess is that you're hearing your friends talk about like REITs and cap rates and X and Y and Z. They're going to talk about that for like 10 or 15 minutes. And then someone's going to say something that you do relate to, something like the reason why I invested in that deal is because I really want to put something away for my kids, and it's not going to work out during my lifetime, but it's going to work out during their lifetime. Now they're talking about
legacy and inheritance and stuff.
Legacy, inheritance, about what we owe our children. Yeah. Do we give them too much? Do we want to force them to go out on their own? No conversation lasts so long that we are permanently excluded from it. It's okay to say like, look, this part, when you're talking about cap rates, not my game. But when you start talking about why you're investing, I'm right there with you. Even though I'm not investing in real estate myself, I know what you're talking about.
Okay, I want to give the test. I'm going to keep going on that story because this is a true testimony from one of the guys later on. I don't know if it was the same day or days following, and he said it wasn't just in relation to that, but maybe I had done that a couple times, just kind of been like real. And he said, dude, man, I really love and I respect that about you so much. You're just kind of okay being you. And I'm thinking, one, so great he gave that testimony, and two, he has no idea I was trying. And I was feeling pressured over here, like I'm the only numb nut in the group, and I just want people to hear that. Okay,
can I ask you, how did that make you feel when he said that?
Great,
great.
It made me feel like I want to do that more. Just be real, don't fake it, don't perform. Yeah. Which again, on that note, Charles, because I want to hit this. And first, I want to brag about you. You talk about being in the flow writing. I love your writing. I love your writing style. You're a great writer. I read your book and I thought, man, I should have done that more in my book. And you do such a good job of giving relatable stories. Okay, so there's my first. Just guys, go get all of his books. Read the books; they're incredible. The stories stick with you. Literally, I need my next book. I need to do even more. It took my editors a lot of pushing to get me to do some, but you do it so well. So you do that so well, and the messages stick. Okay. On that note, you talk about a CIA recruiter.
Yeah,
that's a key story. I think right at the beginning of the book.
Right, Jim Lawler.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and what I want everybody to hear, I want me to hear it too. He tried to sell this woman into being a spy. Right.
And he failed miserably.
He tried to sell. I mean, he had good intent. He wasn't trying to harm her. He was trying to help his country. He was trying to help her. But he was trying to sell her, which I know that I do. I do it with my kids, Charles. Yeah. I'm sure you try to sell them on this, or I do it to other people and and I care. I want to help them. I try to sell them on, and if you would, health and wellness, if you would live this way, whatever would help you. And this is the story, does such a great job when he finally quit and just connected with her. Well, here I'm going to ask you, because this is literally my notes. I wrote, okay, when he connected with her, he didn't then succeed in selling her. She sold herself.
That's exactly right.
Fair?
That's exactly right. So for anyone who hasn't read the book, this is a story about this guy, Jim Lawler. And in the early 80s, he is able to join the CIA, and his first posting is over to Europe, and they tell him, okay, your job is to like recruit some overseas agents. And he tries for months and is just terrible at it. Like he almost gets deported. He starts trying to recruit this one woman who worked in the Russian, the Soviet office, until someone pulled him aside and was like, by the way, she's KGB and she's trying to recruit you. Stop talking to her. Mm-hmm. So eventually this woman, Yasmin, comes into town, and one of his bosses says, go talk to this woman. She works for the foreign ministry in some Middle Eastern government. Lawler bumps into her at a restaurant. He introduces himself as an oil speculator. He invites her to lunch the next day. They start going to lunch and sightseeing together. And eventually he says to her, I'm not actually an oil speculator. I am an intelligence officer. And I'm wondering, because my government wants the same thing you want. She had said she didn't like her government. The religious radicals had come to power. They were making women wear hijabs. They were making it illegal for women to go to college. She really opposed them. And he said, my government wants the same thing you do, which is to undermine the theocracy. Will you work for the CIA in your country? And she freaks out. She starts crying, starts shaking her head, saying, no, no, no. She flees. Lawler goes back and he tells his boss, because he has to describe everything to his boss. And his boss is like, what are you talking about? I already told DC that you recruited this woman. Like you're going to get fired if you can't actually close the deal. So Lawler's freaking out. He thinks that there's no way he's going to be able to do this. He fills literally an entire notebook with ideas. And you're exactly right. He had been trying to sell her. He had told her, like, if you work for us, we'll give you a visa to come to the United States. If you work for us, you'll help create change in your home country. If you work for us, we can give you money. He was trying to explain to her all the benefits she could get.
I was going to say, he's over here, Mr. Practical, which that's what I would be thinking. And she's over here total emotional, and he's not matching, aligning.
Not matching at all. The same way that when you and I are talking to our kids and we're like, look, if you exercise more, you'll be happier and healthier and you'll be strong when you grow up. And our kids are like, whatever, Dad. Like we're trying to sell them. And they're like, I don't care about the benefits you're offering me.
Yeah.
So they go to one final dinner. Lawler convinces Yasmin to come to dinner one last time. This is his last chance. And the whole dinner, she's like down because she's about to return to her home country, and she's really disappointed in herself. She thought things were going to be different, like she'd figure something out. And he keeps trying to cheer her up. He keeps telling her funny stories, keeps telling her about like reminiscing about when they went sightseeing together. And she's not seconding it. She's just not playing along. Like this isn't what she wants. And so as they're having dessert, he remembers this experience he once had back in West Texas. He'd worked for his dad, and his dad they sold steel parts. And he went to go talk to this one woman. He was a terrible salesman. He went to go talk to this one woman, and she was on the phone when he walked in, and her kid was next to her desk, and he like plays with a kid while she's on the phone. Then she gets off the phone. He's like 23 at this point. He makes his sales spiel. She's like, look, I'm not interested. But then she basically starts talking about herself. She starts talking about how hard it is to be a businesswoman and a mom, that it feels like she's like always failing at one or the other, to thank him for like playing with her kid while she was on the phone. And Lawler has no idea what to say, right? Like he's like 23 years old. He doesn't have kids. He's not married, but he has to say something. It's super weird to let someone just talk and not reply. And so he's like, look, I've already lost the sale. So he just starts talking about himself. He starts talking about that it's really hard working for his dad because he keeps on disappointing his dad. His brother is a better salesman than he is, and it makes him feel really bad about himself. And they talk about like their lives for 15 minutes. And then the woman's like, okay, thanks so much. No sale. Lawler leaves. 2 weeks later, she calls up and she puts in the biggest order in the company's history. And Lawler, who's like so clueless, says to her, I can't give you the pricing that you want. Like, I can't give you a discount for that large an order. And she says, that's okay. I feel like we had this connection. I want to do my business with you. So Lawler's thinking about this. He's thinking about this experience as he's sitting there in the restaurant talking to Yasmin as they're having dessert. And he's like, you know what I've been trying to do? I've been trying to sell Yasmin. And what I should do is just be honest. So that's what he does. He starts telling her like, you know what? I'm really worried I'm going to get fired. Like I'm really bad at recruiting. Bad at recruiting spies like you. And I see my coworkers, and some of them have this confidence and this like suaveness, and I don't have it. And he's just telling her about this, and he's just being honest with her. And she starts crying. And he's like, oh God, I have screwed this up. And so he like says, like, please stop crying. I did not mean to make you cry. I'm not trying to pressure you into working for the CIA. And she looks up at him and she whispers and she says, I can do this. This is important. And Lawler again is so freaked out. He's like, no, it's okay. It's okay. You don't have to work for me. Like you can just go home. It's totally fine. And she goes, no. You're right. Like, we both want the same thing. This is how I can make a difference. The next day, she goes to a safe house. She gets trained in communications, covert communications. She was the best asset in the Middle East for the next 20 years. And when I asked Lawler, like, why he was able to do this, what he said is, that's when he learned, like, you don't try and sell someone. You try and be honest with them and have the same kind of conversation they're having. She had spent that entire dinner being upset and glum, and all he tried to do was cheer her up. But what he should have done is he should have been like, look, I understand what it's like to be upset and glum. Like, I understand where you're coming from. And as soon as he did that, they could actually hear each other.
It's a brilliant story. So Charles, you don't know this. Most of my listeners do. This show originated out of me hosting the Ziglar Show. Zig Ziglar, one of our most famous sales trainers ever. And Zig was famous for saying that true sales, caring sales, is a transference of feelings.
Yes.
And I love this story when you say when he quit trying to sell, or in the first analogy where he's trying to sell the lady the steel parts or whatever, that he actually just, I failed. She doesn't want him. She flat out said she doesn't. So he had walkaway power. He didn't care at that point, and he just related and sold her. And same thing over here, that again, it's not a tactic. This is not a tactic to connect so you can get something. It's almost a way to connect with it makes me think of back to the goal. What is my goal in here? And if my goal is to sell something, I'm probably a red flag on this one. Don't connect with the kid on, why you want them to clean your room. Has anybody ever done that to connect with them? I'm thinking about myself, Charles. I got my kid home.
And if you connect, you actually know what they want, right? It's you're not trying to sell. If you understand their needs and desires and you can help solve them, you're not selling them on something. You're solving a problem for them. But I can't know how to solve your problem until I can actually understand who you are.
Understanding. I want to pull that out because again, I would assume that this audience, this is a personal development audience, and they've heard the idea of asking questions, but we've also they may have, just like I have, you've been in a group and somebody heard that message and they're just like the question machine.
Right.
They don't care a crap and they're not trying to understand. They're just asking questions.
It sort of feels like you're being interrogated, right?
Totally. Or being sold. I'm being manipulated. Or back to you said the word manipulated, which I think is at the core of everybody's question about, gosh, I don't want to be manipulative. But if I go in and say, man, this sounds terrible, but playing mind games, if you're paid, we'll pay you $1 million to understand the person. Just figure it. I want you to understand. I want you to walk away and understand what they care about or what they really did. You can do that, and authentically, you're trying to. Now, it may not be because you care about their heart at the bottom pit of your soul, but if you just make the effort to, you're both going to win. Fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So take this conversation that we're having, right? Yeah. Like you want to make a podcast. I want to share my ideas with the world. There's a really cynical way of looking at this, that you're just looking for someone to like fill up time, and I'm just looking for someone to talk about my book. But both of us know that's not what's going on here, right? Even though like you do want good guests, and I do want to tell people about my book, what's actually going on here is that we've pushed beyond that to have a real conversation, to try and understand each other. Like, I think it's fascinating. I know that you've adopted a couple of kids, which I think like is like fascinating and shows something about who you are. And if we had time, I would ask all these questions about it. Like, just because we have other goals doesn't mean we can't connect with each other. And in fact, those other goals are probably going to be easier to achieve if we do genuinely connect with each other. And the only way we genuinely connect is to genuinely connect. You can't fake it good enough. That guy who's asking all those questions and is interrogating everyone else, everyone sees what's going on. Everyone's like oh, please do not invite him to the next party.
Mhm.
Like it's just not, he's asking questions because he wants to talk about himself, or he's asking questions because he wants to figure out how to sell me life insurance. Like we recognize that. But the guy who shows up and he's like, hey, you seem interesting. Like, tell me your story. We probably love to talk to that guy or gal.
That right there, that's probably the mic drop for the show right there. Well, seriously, to genuinely connect. And I'm going to give kudos back to you that part of the benefit of this conversation was that I had already connected with you through your communication and connection through your writing, which is the point of a good writer.
And you were willing to share that. Like, you started the conversation by sharing something. Again, we think about vulnerability as being like a weakness, but you actually shared something vulnerable about yourself. You said, I was on this beach and I loved this book. It's really meant a lot to me. That's exposure of a vulnerability. It's not a vulnerability where, like, I mean, you wouldn't care how anyone judges you. You wouldn't care if anyone tried to attack you on that. But by sharing something about yourself, you set the table for a real conversation.
I should probably do that more. Well, I
think you probably do it all the time.
Well, yes, thank you. I think so. And yet you outlining this, because you do, I feel like you do a lot of work in the book of helping us understand things that we have experienced and seen, but it hasn't been consistent. It hasn't been maybe as intentional enough. So, even to go in with the authenticity of, hey, I'm talking with a person or in a group of people, and I do want to connect. I do want to understand and care. And if I don't, to be honest about that, and go, okay, you know what, I could probably spend better time with my kids. So I'm going to
totally
exit.
But I'll go get a drink from the bar and find someone else to talk to. That's okay.
Yeah, fair. Man, thank you again, folks. I say this somewhat frequently, but I'm going to expound on now. It is a book that I want you to get because you need to study it. I want to study it more and figure out how to more consistently and intentionally put it into my communication endeavors, and probably even more so when they're acute. We've talked about the business dealings or the marriage or the kids and the times when the emotions can derail us and we go in with intent. That I want to be a lot more aware of that. And again, back to aware of myself. What is my goal, as you said, before I go in and open my mouth?
Thank you. And thank you for having me. And I would love to hear from listeners. Like, the truth of the matter is that as a journalist, I want to know how they communicate. Like which of these ideas seem important to them and which of them seem less important. Like, what have they figured out about making that connection? Because at the end of the day, like, we are all participants in this laboratory of how to live together. And every single one of us is conducting these experiments that the rest of us can learn from. So my website's charlesduhigg.com, or you can email me at charles@duhigg.com or .net. Basically, if you Google my name, you'll figure out how to get in touch with me. And I'd love to, and I read every single email. I respond to every single email. I'd love to hear from anyone.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I was going to give that. Well, a couple things, folks. I mean, one, obviously, if you enjoy the show, like I always say, give us a rating and review. On Amazon, you can go there. And what I love is when people actually reference a specific episode, not to go, hey, I love the show. But man, when he had Charles and they talked about communication and man, it hit me here. Let us know. It's such a gift to us. So let us know. You can do that on Apple Podcast. But yeah, his website, and it's Duhigg, Duhigg, Charles Duhigg. Though if I think, you're, thank goodness he's well known enough. You can go misspell it. It'll still come up.
I hope so.
I'll tell you, I'm holding this up for the people in the video. The Power of Habit is my go-to Bible on habits. It has been for, I think, almost a decade now. So you can check this video out at YouTube. Go find me, and we'll have a bunch of clips on social media, kevinmiller.co. And if you want to learn more about your own inner drive, and this is a big piece of it, how you communicate well, you can get my book, What Drives You, on Amazon. Until next time, folks, stay driven.
Yeah.